In the heart of a bustling city, where tourists and locals mingled amidst historic architecture, Corporal James Whittaker stood tall as a figure of discipline and pride. Dressed in his immaculate ceremonial uniform, complete with polished boots and gleaming insignias, he was stationed outside the Grand Palace gates. His presence commanded respect, not just because of the uniform he wore, but also because of the quiet strength he exuded. People passing by couldn't help but glance at him, some snapping photos while others whispered admiringly about how regal and composed he looked. The day had started like any other for Whittaker. He was assigned to guard duty, standing watch over one of the most iconic landmarks in the country. The position wasn't just symbolic. It came with immense responsibility. Every movement, every gesture, even the way he held his rifle, had to reflect precision and professionalism. It was a role that required absolute focus, and Whittaker prided himself on being up to the task. For years, he'd trained rigorously for moments like these, learning to block out distractions and remain steadfast, no matter what happened around him. As the afternoon sun cast golden rays across the square, the crowd swelled. Families strolled by, children pointed excitedly at the palace, and vendors called out their wares. Amidst this lively scene, however, there was one man whose demeanor stood out sharply against the cheerful atmosphere. His name was Charles Hargrove, a wealthy businessman known for his sharp tongue and even sharper opinions. With his expensive suit and air of entitlement, he walked through the square like he owned it, drawing attention wherever he went. Hargrove's arrival didn't go unnoticed by Whittaker, though the guard maintained his stoic expression. Something about the man's posture, a mix of arrogance and disdain, set off an unspoken alarm in Whittaker's mind. Still, he reminded himself of his duty, to stand firm and represent the values of honor and integrity expected of someone in his position. Nothing could shake him from his post, not even someone like Hargrove. When Hargrove finally approached the palace gates, his eyes locked onto Whittaker with unmistakable contempt. At first, he simply muttered under his breath, making comments loud enough for those nearby to hear, but too soft for Whittaker to acknowledge directly. Words like "not fit" and "doesn't belong here" floated into the air, laced with thinly veiled prejudice. Whittaker heard them clearly but chose not to react. Years of training had taught him that responding to provocations only gave power to those who sought to disrupt order. But Hargrove wasn't satisfied with mere words. As the minutes ticked by, his frustration grew. Here was a man, a guard, who refused to rise to his bait or show weakness. Instead of backing down, Whittaker's silence seemed to infuriate him further. Clutching the leash of his massive German shepherd tightly, Hargrove glared at the soldier, his lips curling into a sneer. The tension between them was palpable, drawing curious stares from onlookers. Little did anyone know, this encounter was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would test Whittaker's resolve in ways no one could have anticipated. The weeks following the incident brought a mix of challenges and opportunities for Corporal James Whittaker. While the public adoration continued, so did the legal proceedings against Charles Hargrove. The case garnered significant attention, not only because of Hargrove's high-profile status, but also due to the broader implications it carried about prejudice and accountability. During one court session, evidence was presented showing that Hargrove had a history of similar behavior, incidents where his dog had been used as a tool of intimidation, or where he had made derogatory remarks in public settings. Witnesses recounted stories of feeling unsafe or humiliated by his actions, painting a picture of someone who thrived on exerting power over others. Whittaker himself was called to testify, an experience that left him reflective. Sitting in the witness box, dressed in his formal uniform, he recounted the events of that day with clarity and calmness. His testimony wasn't filled with anger or resentment. Instead, it focused on facts and principles. He described how Hargrove's words and actions had escalated the situation, emphasizing the importance of responsibility when handling animals in public spaces. "A dog is a reflection of its owner," Whittaker said during cross-examination. "If we fail to train ourselves to act with kindness and respect, How can we expect our pets, or anyone else, to do the same? His words resonated deeply with those present in the courtroom. Even the judge nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging the wisdom behind them. When the verdict came down, Hargrove was found guilty of public disturbance and animal endangerment. In addition to fines, he was required to attend mandatory classes on responsible pet ownership and diversity education. Though some felt the punishment was too lenient, others saw it as a step toward rehabilitation, a chance for Hargrove to confront his biases and learn from his mistakes. Meanwhile, Whittaker's life began returning to a semblance of normalcy. The media frenzy slowly died down, allowing him to focus once again on his duties at the palace gates. But the impact of what had happened lingered, not just in the hearts of those who admired him, but within Whittaker himself. He realized that while standing firm in the face of hostility was important, inspiring change required more than just individual acts of courage. It demanded ongoing effort and engagement. Inspired by this realization, Whittaker decided to take action. He reached out to local schools and community centers, offering to speak about leadership, discipline, and empathy. His talks weren't lectures. They were conversations designed to empower young people to think critically and act compassionately. One memorable session took place at a nearby youth center, where Whittaker shared stories from his own life. He spoke about growing up in a working-class neighborhood, facing challenges, and learning the value of perseverance. "Life will test you," he told the group of teenagers gathered around him. "But every challenge is an opportunity to grow stronger, if you let it." The students listened intently, their faces reflecting a mix of admiration and curiosity. Afterward, many approached him with questions or simply to thank him for taking the time to visit. One girl, shy at first, handed him a small drawing she had made, a sketch of a soldier standing beside a dog under a bright sun. "This is you," she said softly. "You showed us that even in tough times, we can find peace." Whittaker accepted the drawing with gratitude, promising to keep it as a reminder of why his work mattered. Beyond these outreach efforts, Whittaker partnered with organizations focused on fostering unity and combating racism. He participated in panel discussions, sharing insights about navigating conflict with patience and dignity. He also collaborated with animal welfare groups, advocating for responsible pet ownership and highlighting the bond between humans and animals. These initiatives gave him a renewed sense of purpose, transforming what could have been a fleeting moment of glory into a platform for meaningful change. As months passed, Whittaker noticed subtle shifts in the way people interacted with him and with each other. Strangers greeted him warmly, often mentioning how his story had inspired them to approach conflicts differently. Parents thanked him for setting an example their children could look up to. Even colleagues commented on how his newfound advocacy work had sparked conversations within the Royal Guard about inclusivity and representation. Through it all, Whittaker remained grounded. He knew that no single person could solve the world's problems, but he believed that every positive action contributed to a larger wave of progress. As he stood guard outside the palace gates one crisp morning, watching. Months after the incident, Corporal James Whittaker's life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. The attention hadn't faded completely, but it had settled into something quieter, a steady stream of appreciation rather than a flood. People still stopped him occasionally to express gratitude or share how his actions had inspired them. Some told stories of standing up to bullies at work or school, while others spoke about choosing calmness over anger in difficult situations. These conversations reminded Whittaker that even small acts of courage could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the original moment. One particularly moving encounter happened on a chilly autumn morning. As Whittaker stood at his post outside the palace gates, an elderly woman approached him, leaning heavily on a cane. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes sparkled with warmth. She introduced herself as Margaret and explained that she had been watching Whittaker from afar for years. "I live just down the street," she said, pointing toward a row of cozy brick houses nearby. "Every day, I walk past here, and I see you standing tall, rain or shine. But what you did that day, It changed something in me. Margaret went on to explain that she had recently faced discrimination herself when trying to join a local community group. Though hesitant at first, she decided to speak up, drawing strength from Whittaker's example. "You showed me that we don't have to let fear stop us," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "So I stood my ground, and now they've welcomed me with open arms." Whittaker listened intently, touched by her words. When she finished, he thanked her sincerely, saying, "Your courage inspires me too. Remember, none of us are alone in this fight." These interactions weren't limited to strangers. Even within the Royal Guard, Whittaker noticed shifts in attitudes and behaviors. His fellow guards began discussing topics like inclusivity and empathy more openly, inspired by his ability to remain composed under pressure. During training sessions, newer recruits often asked for advice on handling challenging situations. Whittaker always encouraged them to focus on principles like patience, respect, and self-control. "It's not about being perfect," he would say. "It's about doing your best, especially when it's hard." The royal family themselves took notice of Whittaker's growing influence. One evening during a formal ceremony held in the Grand Hall of the palace, he was presented with a commendation for exemplary conduct. The award wasn't just for his actions during the incident with Hargrove, but also for his ongoing efforts to inspire positive change. As the medal was pinned to his chest, the room erupted into applause. Whittaker stood humbly, his head bowed slightly, overwhelmed by the recognition yet determined to stay true to himself. Afterward, several members of the royal family approached him personally to express their admiration. One young prince, barely in his 20s, shared how Whittaker's story had motivated him to volunteer with organizations supporting marginalized communities. "You remind us that leadership isn't about titles or uniforms," the prince said earnestly. "It's about making a difference, no matter where you are." Whittaker smiled, grateful for the opportunity to connect with someone who understood the importance of using privilege for good. Despite these accolades, Whittaker remained deeply reflective about the broader lessons of his experience. He knew that while he had handled the situation admirably, there were still countless moments every day where people faced prejudice or hostility without support. This realization fueled his determination to keep pushing for progress. He expanded his outreach efforts, partnering with national campaigns aimed at promoting unity and understanding. Whether speaking at conferences, appearing in educational videos, or mentoring young leaders, Whittaker poured his energy into creating spaces where people felt seen, heard, and valued. At home, he found solace in simple routines, reading books on history and philosophy, journaling his thoughts, and spending time outdoors with his own dog, a loyal golden retriever named Max. Walking through the park with Max by his side gave him a chance to reflect on how far he'd come, and how much farther he hoped to go. Sometimes, children playing nearby would recognize him and run over to pet Max, asking questions about his job, or sharing their dreams of becoming soldiers someday. Those moments filled Whittaker with hope, reminding him that the future rested in the hands of those willing to learn and grow. As winter approached, bringing frosty mornings and shorter days, Whittaker felt a quiet sense of peace. Life hadn't returned to the way it was before the incident. He doubted it ever would, but he didn't want it to. Instead, he embraced the changes, knowing that the days following the incident brought a whirlwind of attention that Corporal James Whittaker hadn't anticipated. News outlets across the country, and even internationally, picked up the story, turning what had started as a tense moment in a city square into a symbol of resilience and grace under pressure. Headlines praised Whittaker's actions, with phrases like "Guard's calm response shocks nation" and "Hero in uniform wins hearts." Social media was abuzz, with users sharing videos of the encounter alongside heartfelt messages about courage and humanity. For many, Whittaker wasn't just a guard. He was a beacon of hope in an often divisive world. But fame wasn't something Whittaker sought or enjoyed. As much as he appreciated the kind words from strangers, he found himself uncomfortable with the spotlight. People stopped him on his way to work, asking for photos or autographs. Strangers sent letters to the palace, requesting meetings with him. Some even left small gifts at the gates, a bouquet of flowers, a handwritten note, or homemade cookies wrapped neatly in colorful paper. While these gestures were touching, they reminded Whittaker of how quickly life could change when thrust into the public eye. Despite the chaos, there were moments of genuine connection that made it all worthwhile. One afternoon, as Whittaker stood at his post, a middle-aged woman approached him with tears in her eyes. She introduced herself as Sarah, explaining that she had been walking through the square during the incident with Charles Hargrove. "I've never seen anyone handle themselves like you did," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You didn't just protect us. You showed us what real strength looks like." Whittaker listened intently, nodding as she spoke. When she finished, he thanked her sincerely, saying, "It means a lot to hear that. But I want you to know, anyone can rise above negativity if they choose to. It's not about being perfect. It's about doing your best, even when it's hard." Sarah smiled through her tears before leaving, clutching her hands to her chest as though holding on to his words. Amidst the praise, however, came reminders of the darker side of human nature. Charles Hargrove's legal troubles continued to unfold, with reports revealing more about his history of discriminatory behavior. During court hearings, witnesses recounted instances where he had used racial slurs or displayed aggressive conduct in public spaces. The case drew widespread condemnation, sparking debates about accountability and prejudice. Many credited Whittaker's response as the catalyst for exposing Hargrove's true character, while others argued that such incidents highlighted the need for greater awareness and education around respect and inclusivity. For Whittaker, this part of the story weighed heavily on his mind. He understood that his actions had played a role in bringing justice, but he also knew that punishing one person wouldn't solve deeper societal issues. Late at night, after his shifts ended, he often sat alone in his quarters, reflecting on the bigger picture. How could moments like this inspire lasting change? What lessons could people take away beyond the headlines? His thoughts eventually led him to consider ways he could contribute positively outside of his duties as a royal guard. Perhaps he could visit schools to talk about leadership, discipline, and empathy. Or maybe he could partner with organizations working to combat racism and promote unity. These ideas excited him, not because they would add to his reputation, but because they offered a chance to make a difference in a meaningful way. One evening, as he walked home from the palace, Whittaker noticed a group of teenagers gathered near a park bench. They were laughing and chatting animatedly, their energy infectious. Something about their camaraderie caught his attention, and he paused for a moment to watch them. One boy glanced up and recognized him immediately. "Hey, isn't that the guy from the video?" he exclaimed, nudging his friends. Within seconds, the entire group surrounded Whittaker, peppering him with questions and compliments. Instead of brushing them off, Whittaker took a seat on the bench and engaged them in conversation. He asked about their lives, their dreams, and their views on the world. In return, they listened intently as he shared stories from his own experiences, both challenging and rewarding. By the time he stood up to leave, the teenagers were grinning ear to ear, inspired by his humility and wisdom. As he walked away, Whittaker realized something important. The impact of his actions extended far beyond the square where it all began. Every interaction, no matter how small, carried the potential to plant seeds of positivity. And though he couldn't control how others behaved, he could continue to lead by example, one calm decision, one kind word, and one thoughtful gesture at a time. As the German shepherd sat obediently at Corporal James Whittaker's feet, wagging its tail as if it had found a new friend, the atmosphere in the square shifted dramatically. The crowd, which moments ago had been gripped by fear and uncertainty, now buzzed with astonishment and admiration. People exchanged wide-eyed glances, some clapping softly while others whispered words of praise for the guard's calmness and control. It was clear that Whittaker had just turned what could have been a dangerous situation into something almost surreal, a moment where humanity triumphed over hostility. But Charles Hargrove wasn't ready to concede defeat. Standing a few feet away, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment, he stared at the scene before him in disbelief. His carefully orchestrated attempt to humiliate Whitaker had backfired spectacularly. Instead of cowering or retaliating, the guard had somehow managed to win over the very tool Hargrove had intended to use against him, his own dog. For a man who prided himself on dominance and superiority, this was nothing short of humiliating. Hargrove clenched his fists, his mind racing as he tried to regain control of the situation. "What trickery is this?" he snapped, his voice loud enough to carry across the square. He pointed an accusing finger at Whitaker, his tone dripping with venom. "You think you're clever, don't you? Manipulating my dog like some kind of circus act." His words were meant to sound authoritative, but they came off as desperate, even pitiful. The crowd, now firmly on Whitaker's side, responded with murmurs of disapproval. Some people openly rolled their eyes, while others shook their heads in disgust at Hargrove's behavior. Whitaker, still holding the leash of the now docile dog, straightened up slowly. His expression remained calm, though there was a subtle firmness in his gaze as he finally addressed Hargrove directly. "Sir," he began, his voice measured and steady, "your dog seems confused. Perhaps you should focus on training yourself before expecting obedience from others." The words landed like a punch, sharp yet dignified. They weren't shouted or delivered with malice. Instead, they carried the weight of truth, cutting through Hargrove's bluster with precision. The crowd erupted into murmurs of approval, some even applauding Whitaker's response. A young woman nearby whispered to her companion, "Did you hear that? What a perfect comeback." Even the police officer who had been observing the scene from a distance couldn't help but nod in agreement. Whitaker's composure and wit had not only diffused the situation, but also exposed Hargrove's flaws for everyone to see. For Hargrove, however, the humiliation was too much to bear. He lunged forward, reaching out to grab the leash from Whitaker's hand. "Give me my dog," he demanded, his voice rising to a near shout. But Whitaker didn't budge. With a slight step back, he kept the leash firmly in his grip, ensuring the dog remained safe and under control. "I'm afraid I can't do that, sir," Whitaker replied calmly. "This animal poses a risk to the public when handled irresponsibly. Let's allow the authorities to decide the next steps." At this point, the nearby police officer stepped forward, having witnessed the entire exchange. He introduced himself briefly before addressing Hargrove. "Sir, we need to discuss your actions here today," the officer said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Hargrove sputtered, trying to defend himself, but the evidence was undeniable. Not only had he unleashed his dog in a crowded area, but his racially charged remarks and aggressive behavior had put countless people at risk. As the officer guided Hargrove aside, Whitaker handed over the leash, ensuring the dog would be cared for until further arrangements were made. The crowd watched silently as Hargrove was escorted away, his earlier bravado replaced by a defeated shuffle. Meanwhile, Whitaker returned to his post, resuming his position outside the palace gates as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet the energy around him had changed. People lingered longer than usual, taking photos and sharing stories about the remarkable guard who had handled such a tense situation with grace and poise. Though the immediate crisis had passed, Whitaker knew this incident would leave a lasting impact, not just on those who had witnessed it, but also on how he viewed his role as a protector. In that moment, he realized that being a royal guard wasn't just about standing tall in uniform. It was about embodying the values of patience, empathy, and leadership. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the square, Whitaker felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them, not with anger or aggression, but with the quiet strength that had already earned him the respect of so many. As the police officer led Charles Hargrove away, his protests growing fainter with each step, Corporal James Whitaker stood quietly at his post, his demeanor unchanged. The chaos that had erupted just moments ago now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by an almost serene calm. Yet the ripple effects of what had transpired were far from over. People lingered in the square, reluctant to leave the scene of such an extraordinary event. Some approached Whitaker cautiously, their faces glowing with admiration, while others simply stood back, whispering among themselves about the guard's remarkable composure. A young boy, no older than 10, broke free from his mother's grip and ran up to Whitaker, his eyes wide with awe. "Mister, how did you do that?" he asked breathlessly, pointing toward the spot where the German shepherd had been moments earlier. His innocent question drew a small smile from Whitaker, who knelt down slightly to meet the child's gaze. "It's all about staying calm," he explained gently. "Animals can sense when we're scared or angry. If you stay peaceful, they'll follow your lead." The boy nodded earnestly, clearly impressed, before his mother hurried over to apologize for the interruption. But Whitaker waved her off with a polite gesture. "No need to apologize," he said warmly. "I'm happy to answer his questions." The exchange was brief, but it left a lasting impression on those nearby. Here was a man who, despite facing hostility and danger, still found time to connect with others, especially the next generation. It was a testament to his character, and a reminder that true strength wasn't just about physical prowess. It was also about kindness and humility. As the crowd began to disperse, reporters arrived on the scene, drawn by the buzz spreading across social media. Videos of the incident had already gone viral, capturing Whitaker's calm response and the dramatic turn of events. Microphones were thrust toward him as journalists peppered him with questions. "What went through your mind when the dog lunged at you?" one reporter asked eagerly. Another chimed in. "How did you manage to calm it down so quickly?" Whitaker handled the attention with the same grace he had shown during the confrontation. He spoke slowly and thoughtfully, choosing his words carefully. "When you're trained for situations like this, you learn to focus on solutions rather than reactions," he explained. "My priority was ensuring everyone's safety, including the dogs. Animals respond well to patience and reassurance, and I knew that reacting aggressively would only make things worse." His answers resonated deeply with those listening. In a world often driven by anger and division, Whitaker's approach felt refreshingly different. He wasn't boastful or self-righteous. Instead, he emphasized teamwork, discipline, and understanding. Even the reporters, hardened by years of chasing sensational stories, seemed genuinely moved by his humility. Meanwhile, the palace staff emerged to express their gratitude. One of the senior officials, a tall man with silver hair and a dignified bearing, approached Whitaker with a respectful nod. "You've done more than uphold our standards today," he said solemnly. "You've reminded us all of the values we strive to represent: dignity, courage, and compassion." The official extended an invitation for Whitaker to attend a private ceremony hosted by the royal family, where his actions would be formally recognized. Though honored, Whitaker accepted the praise with characteristic modesty. "I was just doing my job," he replied with a slight shrug. "Anyone in my position would have done the same." But deep down, he knew that wasn't entirely true. Not everyone could have remained so composed under pressure or turned a moment of conflict into an opportunity for connection. His actions had not only diffused a volatile situation, but also inspired countless people who witnessed them firsthand, or through the viral videos circulating online. As evening fell and the square emptied, Whitaker took a moment to reflect. Leaning against the palace gates, he gazed out at the horizon, where streaks of orange and pink painted the sky. For all the challenges he faced daily, days like this reaffirmed why he had chosen this path. Being a royal guard wasn't just about protecting buildings or symbols. It was about safeguarding the principles they represented. And today, he had proven that even in the face of hatred and aggression, there was always room for humanity. The weight of the day settled over him, but it wasn't heavy. It was grounding. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new crowds, and perhaps new provocations, but Whitaker felt prepared. After all, he had learned something important today. Real power didn't come from dominance or force. It came from the ability to rise above negativity and show the world what true leadership looked like. As time moved forward, Corporal James Whittaker's story became more than just a tale of courage. It evolved into a legacy. The incident with Charles Hargrove and the German Shepherd was no longer just an isolated event. It had grown into a symbol of resilience, grace, and the power of choosing kindness over conflict. People from all walks of life continued to draw inspiration from Whittaker's actions, using his example as a blueprint for handling adversity with dignity. Whittaker himself remained steadfast in his commitment to making a difference. His outreach efforts expanded beyond local communities to national platforms, where he addressed larger audiences about the importance of empathy and leadership. Schools invited him to speak at assemblies, businesses sought his insights during team-building workshops, and even television programs featured him as a guest. Yet, despite the growing recognition, Whittaker never lost sight of what mattered most: connecting with individuals on a personal level. Whether he was talking to a classroom full of eager students or sharing a quiet moment with someone struggling to find their voice, he approached every interaction with sincerity and humility. One particularly impactful initiative Whittaker launched was a mentorship program for young people interested in careers in public service. Called Guardians of Tomorrow, the program paired participants with mentors who guided them not only in developing practical skills, but also in cultivating values like integrity, patience, and compassion. Many of the mentees credited Whittaker with helping them see themselves as leaders capable of creating positive change. One teenager, named Aiden, wrote a heartfelt letter thanking Whittaker for believing in him when no one else did. "You showed me that being strong doesn't mean never feeling afraid. It means doing the right thing even when you're scared." Aiden wrote, "Because of you, I know I can make a difference." Meanwhile, Charles Hargrove's journey took a different path. After completing his mandatory classes on diversity and responsible pet ownership, Hargrove initially returned to his old ways, grumbling about how unfair the world was. But over time, something shifted within him. Perhaps it was the lessons he learned in those courses, or maybe it was witnessing the overwhelming support Whittaker received from the public. Whatever the reason, Hargrove began reflecting on his behavior and its consequences. He started volunteering at animal shelters, working quietly behind the scenes to care for abandoned dogs and cats. Though he avoided the spotlight, rumors circulated that he had turned a corner, seeking redemption in small, meaningful ways. The contrast between Whittaker and Hargrove served as a powerful reminder of the choices people face when confronted with their flaws. While Whittaker chose to rise above negativity and inspire others, Hargrove's road to redemption highlighted that growth is possible, even for those who have caused harm. Together, their stories underscored the complexity of human nature and the potential for transformation. Years later, when Whittaker finally retired from his duties as a Royal Guard, he did so knowing he had left an indelible mark on the institution and on society as a whole. His final day on duty was marked by a ceremony attended by colleagues, friends, and strangers alike. As he stood before the crowd, now grayer-haired but still standing tall, he delivered a short yet poignant speech. "Being a guard isn't just about protecting buildings or symbols," he said. "It's about protecting values. Values like respect, unity, and hope. And these are things we all carry within us, whether we wear a uniform or not." After retiring, Whittaker didn't slow down. Instead, he dedicated himself fully to his advocacy work, traveling across the country to speak, write, and collaborate with organizations focused on fostering understanding and equality. His memoir, titled Standing Tall: Lessons in Courage and Compassion, became a bestseller, resonating with readers of all ages. In it, he shared not just the story of the incident with Hargrove, but also reflections on his life, career, and the lessons he learned along the way. Today, Whittaker's name is synonymous with strength, humility, and humanity. Statues and plaques commemorating his contributions can be found in parks and community centers nationwide. Yet perhaps his greatest legacy lies in the countless lives he touched, people who, inspired by his example, chose to lead with kindness and stand firm against injustice. For Whitaker, success wasn't measured by fame or accolades. It was defined by the ripples of positivity he helped create. As he sat on a park bench one sunny afternoon, watching children play and dogs chase each other through the grass, Whitaker felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Life had tested him, challenged him, and ultimately transformed him. But through it all, he had stayed. The tension in the air thickened as Charles Hargrove continued to glare at Corporal James Whitaker, his frustration boiling over. The guard's unwavering composure only fueled Hargrove's anger, and he began pacing back and forth in front of the palace gates like a predator circling its prey. His polished leather shoes clicked sharply against the cobblestones, each step echoing through the square. Onlookers who had been casually chatting or admiring the palace now turned their attention to the unfolding scene, sensing that something was about to happen. Hargrove wasn't used to being ignored. In his world, people either bent to his will or faced the consequences of crossing him. But here was Whitaker, standing tall and silent, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. It was maddening. Clutching the leash of his German shepherd tighter, Hargrove leaned closer to Whitaker, sneering as he spat out another racial slur. "You think you're better than us," he growled, his voice dripping with venom. "People like you don't deserve to stand where you are." Whitaker didn't flinch. He kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, his posture unchanging. Inside, however, his mind raced. He knew exactly what Hargrove was trying to do, provoke him into losing control. If Whitaker so much as raised his voice or stepped out of line, it would not only tarnish his reputation, but also undermine the dignity of the Royal Guard. Yet staying calm in the face of such blatant hostility required every ounce of self-discipline he possessed. Each insult felt like a pebble hitting a window pane, testing how far it could be pushed before shattering. But Hargrove wasn't done. Seeing that Whitaker still refused to engage, he decided to escalate things further. With a smug grin, he unclipped the leash from his dog's collar. The large German shepherd, trained to respond to commands, immediately tensed up, its ears perking forward as it awaited instruction. Hargrove's grin widened as he pointed directly at Whitaker. "Go on," he said loudly, his tone mocking. "Teach this impostor a lesson." The crowd gasped audibly as the dog lunged forward, barking ferociously. Its powerful legs propelled it toward Whitaker with alarming speed, its teeth bared and eyes locked onto the guard. For a moment, chaos erupted in the square. Parents quickly pulled their children back, vendors abandoned their stalls, and murmurs of panic spread among the spectators. Everyone expected the worst, a violent confrontation between man and beast. Yet Whitaker remained eerily calm. Years of military training had prepared him for high-pressure situations, and though this was unlike anything he'd faced before, his instincts kicked in almost instantly. Instead of panicking or lashing out, he assessed the situation carefully. The dog was fast, yes, but animals often responded to body language and tone more than aggression. Whitaker knew that reacting violently would only make the situation worse and play right into Hargrove's hands. As the German shepherd circled him, snarling and snapping dangerously close to his legs, Whitaker took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of dozens of eyes watching him, waiting to see how he would handle this unexpected challenge. Some people whispered words of encouragement, while others braced themselves for disaster. Hargrove, meanwhile, watched with glee, clearly enjoying the spectacle he had created. To him, this was more than just an attack on Whitaker. It was a statement meant to humiliate and intimidate. But Whitaker wasn't thinking about Hargrove anymore. His focus shifted entirely to the animal in front of him. Slowly, deliberately, he crouched down, lowering himself to the dog's level. His movements were steady and controlled, designed to convey calmness rather than threat. Extending one hand palm up, he began speaking softly, his voice firm yet soothing. "Easy now," he murmured, repeating the phrase over and over again. "It's okay. You're safe." For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. The dog paused mid-growl, its ears twitching as it processed Whitaker's tone. Then, astonishingly, it stopped barking altogether. Its once hostile demeanor softened, and after a few tense seconds, it sat down at Whitaker's feet, tail wagging uncertainly. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Where moments ago there had been chaos, there was now an eerie stillness broken only by the sound of distant traffic. Hargrove's jaw dropped. The crowd let out a collective sigh of relief, followed by murmurs of disbelief and admiration. No one could have predicted this outcome, not even Whitaker himself. But as he stood up slowly, holding the dog's leash firmly in his hand, he realized that this incident was far from over. Hargrove's face reddened with rage, and his next move would determine whether this confrontation ended peacefully or spiraled into something much worse.